today's session on how to build synergies between the Rio Conventions. So I'm Marie Stefania, and I have a pleasure of moderating this session today. So this webinar is part of a joint capacity building program, which is initiated by the Secretariat of a Free Rio Convention, that is UNFCCC, CBD, and UNCCD. So this is the fourth session in our ongoing webinar series, which began in August last year. So far, we've explored in our first webinar, integrated planning of national strategies and policies. In the second webinar, we looked at accessing and mobilizing finance for synergistic projects. And in the third webinar, we looked at the role of local and indigenous knowledge in supporting synergies. So the Joint Capacity Building Program in itself seeks to strengthen individual, institutional, and systemic capacities to enhance collaboration across climate change, biodiversity, and land management, ultimately contributing to the objectives of the Rio Conventions and the synergies. So today's session focuses on how to build synergies in national adaptation plans, opportunities for joint action and investment. So during today's session, you will hear from leading experts who will share practical insights on how NAP processes can promote integrated action and unlock joint financing opportunities. We'll also explore a concrete national case study to illustrate these synergies in action. So before we start, before we delve deeper into our topic today, just a few housekeeping rules. So to avoid disruption and background noises, kindly ensure that your microphone is muted unless you are given the floor by the moderator to make an intervention. And also, recording of today's session as well as presentation will be uploaded on the UNFCCC's event page. The link to the page will be posted in the chat shortly. Lastly, please note that by participating in this event, you consent to it being recorded. So on our agenda today, so we'll be starting with opening remarks, and then we'll have a keynote presentation, followed by a country perspective from Belize on building synergies in practice. Then we're going to have a panel discussion. Then we're going to have a session of interactive question and answers. And before we delve deeper into our discussion today, I now invite Alejandro Kilpatrick, manager at the Capacity Building Subdivision, UNFCCC Secretariat, for his opening remarks. Alejandro, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefania. It's a pleasure to see you and see all colleagues and all participants in this webinar. Very exciting discussions ahead. On behalf of not only the UNFCCC, but also our sisters convention, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this webinar. And I say this with a lot of pride, because this joint Rio Conventions capacity building program that Stefania was mentioning is a very concrete activity showcasing the collaboration between the Rio Conventions. In the sense that we all heard a lot about the importance of synergies. It's always recognized in the different international meetings, international conventions, but there is a lot of things still to be done to materialize the synergies. We know they're important, everyone recognizes they're important, and a lot is happening to make them happen. But we've seen that there is more to be done, particularly in the area of enhancing capacities, building capacities. These conventions, the CBD, UNFCCC, and CCD, have evolved through their natural process, but they have become a bit more complex. And sometimes government officials or other stakeholders do not comprehend fully the context or the instruments of the different conventions. We have a lot of interest in instruments like for the Climate Change Convention, the NDCs, the NAPs, for biodiversity, the MBSAPs, for CCD, the land degradation neutrality targets, and there are other similar instruments. So this complexity is leading to clearly the need to enhance capacities to understand this complexity, but also on more practical aspects like materializing these synergies, mostly through concrete programs and projects, which required a lot of coordination of national stakeholders and partners. But we also seen that synergies are they are effective, and they have multiple benefits for the implementation of the different Rio agreements, but they also make sense in the transactions cost perspective. There are a lot of studies highlighting that doing synergy implementation of the Rio Conventions in a synergistic manner carries a lot of benefits in terms of reduced cost, effectiveness, and better integration of the objectives of the three conventions. So, and one of the most important elements when talking about synergies is the notion of adaptation. So it's one of the most evident common denominators for synergies because of the connection between the objectives of the three Rio Conventions. When you talk about biodiversity protection, of course, you're talking about from the ecosystem management or a nature-based solutions approach, which is also central to the UNFCCC. You're talking about sustainable land management in the context of the CCD, of course, addressing the impacts of climate change when managing land in a more sustainable way is critical. And also for developing projects that are generating also multiple benefits for development of affected communities, of indigenous peoples. So adaptation is at the center of synergies, and we're very proud and thankful to have experts here to mention that exactly from different perspectives, from the NAP itself, the National Adaptation Plan, but also from the perspective of finance and local experiences from Belize. So very excited about the discussions starting soon. And just to finish, again, a word of thanks to our colleagues in the other conventions, CBD and CCD. Thanks to Nancy for being here, and other colleagues for their cooperation. Last year, as we all know, it was a very important year in terms of the three conventions having their conference of the parties, and the issue of synergies came very strongly in the decisions, particularly in the CBD CUP, where there are very explicit calls for the three secretaries to work together, and even in specifically in the context of capacity building, the CBD has a very concrete decision asking the CBD to continue working with the other conventions on particularly on capacity building. So, and as Stefania mentioned, that this joint capacity building program continues, and we're trying to through these webinars capture what are the common issues where we can add value to stakeholders, and also see how to continue with this program and evolve into something that will add additional value and help address the mandates or the objectives of the three conventions. So I'll stop here, Stefania. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Alejandro, for your opening remarks. So next, it is a great pleasure to welcome Sonam Kandu from Adaptation Division at the UNFCCC Secretariat. Sonam, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. It's my pleasure to be able to speak at today's webinar on how to build synergies in the national adaptation plans because of this joint work that we do under the Rio Conventions, mainly because it is important that we recognize that climate change, biodiversity loss, and land degradation are interconnected, and that we need to be able to tackle them through the integrated and systems-based approaches that we have been discussing for quite some time under the NAPs. So today's discussion is both timely and urgent as we collectively seek to strengthen coherence across adaptation, biodiversity, and land use policies, while also trying to look at how we might be able to mobilize action and also finance. So maybe if I can just touch a little more in depth in terms of national adaptation plans, I think most of you in this call will agree that NAPs serve as an umbrella program for adaptation which brings together diverse sectoral and subnational adaptation strategies under a national vision for countries that addresses not only the immediate vulnerabilities, but also looking at long-term resilience. So the NAV actually provides guidance for how you might integrate adaptation into national and sectoral development policies, ensuring coherence across economic growth, poverty reduction, sustainable development, and climate resilience goals. So promoting synergy among the Rio Conventions can significantly enhance climate change adaptation by aligning the goals, resources, and actions. Additionally, I want to touch on the call to accelerate the formulation of NAVs and to have them submitted by 2025 based on decisions that were taken in Dubai in COP28. And this is a reminder on the urgency of our task and also an opportunity to synergize the different agendas. It was also timely that we received the mandate to update the technical guidelines of the NAV process, which was first produced in 2012, and currently the LDC expert group is updating these guidelines. So what the approach that the group has taken in terms of updating this guideline is also promoting alignment with the global goal on adaptation, and also it also emphasizes on synergy not only across the Rio Conventions, but also other frameworks such as the Sendai framework, the New Urban Agenda, and also the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In fact, there are several supplementary materials on NAVs, and in particular on materials that link to the thematic issues of the Rio Conventions. The NAV SDGI frame, which was developed by the LDC expert group, is based on this concept of providing a structured and systems-based approach whereby countries can align their adaptation planning with the SDGs. So by identifying some of the key systems like food, water, and health, and the functions that they provide, they also look at the impacts that they're trying to avoid, and the iframe helps countries identify where the synergies lie, where the co-benefits can be found. And also additionally, some supplementaries that were produced jointly, we have with the UNCCD, we had a supplement on promoting synergies in addressing biodiversity and climate change. We also worked with the UNCCD, where we had another supplementary produced on promoting synergies between land degradation, neutrality, and climate change. Additionally, I also wanted to quickly touch on this, on a recently produced policy brief that the LDC expert group produced on aligning NAVs, NDCs, and adaptation communication, mainly because some of the benefits that were highlighted in the alignment paper is also relevant to building synergies across the Rio Conventions, such as improving efficiency and coordination, how it promotes policy coherence, and also the importance of having comprehensive approaches to national actions and facilitating access to finance. So the synergy among the MEAs lays the foundation for integrative, nature positive, and regenerative approaches to produce integrated plans. But in order to turn these plans into actions, we have to mobilize finance, as we all know that the adaptation gap finance is far greater than the current flows. So in line with that, we have the NAV 3.0 initiative, which was launched by the Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC, which also identifies innovative and novel financing for NAVs as one of the 4 pillars to support NAV formulation and implementation, because we know that public finance in itself will not be enough to address adaptation finance gaps. So coming back to calling on the joint action and synergy, I think by aligning efforts across the 3 Rio Conventions and national development priorities, countries can create cohesive investment frameworks that speak to multiple funders and deliver multiple benefits, helping to close the finance gap that I was mentioning earlier. So I hope that I was able to provide some brief insights onto the work that is ongoing in NAVs to facilitate the discussions in today's webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sonam, for this very insightful information. And as you mentioned, our discussion today is very timely. And to delve deeper into that, I would like now to invite Annika Turton from the NAP Global Network at IIST who's going to present a keynote presentation. Annika, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Marie. I'm just going to share my screen. All right, so I hope you should all be able to see my slides now. Thank you, Marie, again. My name is Annika Turton. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor with the NAP Global Network. And just very quickly, in case you are not familiar with the NAP Global Network, it supports developing countries to advance their NAP processes to help them accelerate climate change adaptation efforts around the globe. And so the network was established in 2014 at COP20 in Lima in Peru. And it was initiated by adaptation practitioners from 11 developing and developed countries. And today, the NAP Global Network actually connects over 3,000 participants from more than 170 countries, all working on national adaptation planning and action. And we've delivered direct support to more than 65 countries over the last 10 years, actually. And thank you again for inviting me for providing the keynote presentation on this important topic. And I thought I could start off with just a little bit of context and why this is relevant for what's the context and why is this actually politically relevant for our conversation. And I really like this graphic that was produced by UNEP because it really clearly actually formulates what we are talking about in terms of synergies. So climate change, biodiversity loss, land degradation are interconnected crises, and so are their solutions. And really nicely in this diagram, you can see climate change has a direct impact on causes biodiversity loss, species range loss, extinction risks, ocean acidification. But biodiversity loss directly impacts land degradation and deforestation, so loss of ecosystem functioning. And that in turn also has a direct impact on greenhouse gas emissions, increased drought, loss of carbon sinks. But then, as I said, it's kind of like almost like a vicious cycle. And on the other hand, climate change directly impacts land degradation and deforestation. And then again, that has a direct impact on biodiversity loss, food habitat loss, extinction risk, and then losing ecosystem functions, services has a direct impact on climate change because it reduces the terrestrial marine carbon stocks and we're experiencing a loss of our carbon sinks. And then I also I added the little icons of the different conventions, the Rio Conventions that have been established over time to address these individual crises. And that really provides the foundation why building synergies is such an important topic and why we really have to work as individual countries on building these synergies. So there's really a need to make better use of existing opportunities internationally, nationally, and local, and to translate these synergies that are created by these crises into policies as well as implementation. So I feel we've mentioned synergies quite a few times already, very early into this webinar, but I thought I just summarize again some of the speakers or the opening remarks have already mentioned this. But why do they really matter? So it's really aligning mitigation, adaptation, biodiversity commitments, and land degradation neutrality targets ensures a holistic approach rather than implementing any of these strategies in an individual or siloed manner. It allows you to identify overlapping objectives and prevent unnecessary duplication. It promotes efficiency in actions, use of resources and capacity, but also, most important really, it ensures efforts in one area do not undermine progress in another. And it also helps to overcome governance fragmentation at the national level. Even though it's an investment in coordination, these efforts can really improve collaboration also and encourage knowledge sharing across different ministries, departments, and teams. So we know why it matters, but what do we actually mean by building synergies? So there's a definition from UNEP from 2010 that I found. So synergies are the result of joint action that goes beyond the sum of individual activities, making efforts more effective and efficient. So we try to take that and apply this to the context of biodiversity, land, and the climate nexus or interface. And at that level, it really means that developing synergies involves intentional coordination of planning and implementation of international policy instruments and subsequent national commitments and strategies. So specifically, we're talking about long-term strategies, L&D targets, nationally determined contributions, national adaptation plans, as well as national biodiversity strategies and action plans. So I thought it was helpful to just what does that mean and what does it look like in the global context as an overview. So as I mentioned, we have the 3 conventions: United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Convention on Biological Diversity, and United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. And under each of these, we have different frameworks or agreements that countries have negotiated over time. And then under these agreements, we also have the national commitments and strategies that are most important, really the heart of any of these agreements in translating our global commitments into national commitments. So under the Paris Agreement, under the UNFCCC, we have the NDCs as well as the NAPs. And the objectives here are really to reduce national greenhouse gas emissions, set reduction targets, as well as reduce vulnerability and build resilience to climate change. And under the CBD, or the Convention on Biological Diversity, we have the newly agreed upon Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and really at the heart of it are national biodiversity and action plans, which aim to conserve and help biodiversity loss, promote sustainable use of biodiversity, and most important, also equitable to the distribution of biodiversity benefits. And then under the UNCCD, we have the land degradation neutrality targets that really aim to set actionable targets to halt and reverse land degradation. And when we talk about synergies, this is the area that I wanted to point out. That's where we're really talking about when we talk about NAPs, as well as the other strategies. Again, at the heart of these agreements, that really, these are the commitments and the instruments that we are trying to build these intentional synergies, as well as collaboration and coordination between those strategies. And I wanted to share this. So the NAP Global Network has a platform that we call NAP Trends, where we do an analysis of each national adaptation plan that has been submitted to the UNFCCC. And what we found, we also look at synergies in these NAPs, and we found that countries are actually intentionally, actively trying to make these links to all 3 Rio Conventions. So these results are from 2024, from last summer. And at that point, we had 49 NAPs that mentioned or made a reference or linked directly to their NDC, 29 NAPs that were directly linking to the CBD or directly to their NBSAP, and then also to a UNCCD. We had 22 NAPs. So out of 56, 49 of them referenced their NDC, which is more, I think it's not surprising given that both the NDC and NAP fall under the UNFCCC. But we've also noticed, even with almost a year later, now with the Global Biodiversity Framework, we see actually an uptick in NAPs making newly released NAPs or updated NAPs that make active reference to these new strategies coming out. And then maybe very quickly before moving on to other discussion points, I'd like to say a little bit of like, how can the NAP process actually be used as an entry point for synergies? And it was really exciting to hear that the new NAP technical guidelines will have more emphasis on building synergies to the other conventions. But I didn't want to go through the specific steps, but really focus on 6 points, entry points that we see that countries are using to build intentional synergies and coordination to other strategies and instruments. And one is identifying synergies and cross-referencing. So identifying common objectives and targets. We see, for example, countries that have very specific alignment between targets that they mentioned in their NDC, in their NAP, and for example, the NBSAP. There's acknowledgement of that these processes are taking place in parallel and that these strategies should be talking to each other. We also have seen that specific key priority sectors lend themselves very well for synergies. And I think we've heard those mentioned already. Water is one of them, food, energy. So there's specific opportunities there. And we see that when countries identify priorities in specific sectors in their strategies, that there's already sometimes cross-referencing or initiatives are identified that speak to both NAPs and NDCs or to both NAPs and NBSAPs. And another important opportunity that I also wanted to mention is this year, countries are submitting their updated NDCs, but and they're also asked to update their NBSAPs. And these are important opportunities that countries are aware of and they're using to identify synergies and make direct links between instruments and strategies. And then as a second entry point, coordination and collaboration. So many countries have existing coordination mechanisms where national focal points under different Rio Conventions can actually actively engage with one another. NBSAPs, NDCs, NAPs often have similar stakeholder engagement processes. So these are important opportunities where resources can be shared, where stakeholder processes can be held together, or the same kind of stakeholders brought in together for similar consultation processes. We see there's active engagement in trying to share information. So for example, you will see, and we've noticed in some documents, climate vulnerability risk assessments will be referenced in NBSAPs and NDCs or NAPs as one foundational document rather than having different data sources that are being shared. So and then also countries are looking at trying to identify or build platforms where they can share information and data that is relevant for different Rio Conventions. And then we will hear a little bit more about finance, but I wanted to point that out as well. This is an opportunity for financial resources to be prioritized and pooled, in particular for initiatives or for projects that deliver joint outcomes under any of these Rio Conventions. And specifically, I mentioned here gender responsiveness, but also MBS. These are initiatives that speak to multiple objectives of the Rio Conventions, as well as the national strategies that are coming out of this agreement. Less so, but very much aware. Most countries are very much aware of the need to emphasize joint resource mobilization from an efficiency point of view. But yet we still see a lot of separate funding streams or financial resources that are being pooled or allocated in order to finance different strategies. Another entry point, obviously, are actions. We heard this right at the beginning. Ecosystems are really at the heart of any of these crises and agreements. So the widening the scale implementation and upscaling and nature-based solutions, ecosystem-based adaptation is an important entry point. And we noticed that all NAPs include nature-based solutions or ecosystem-based adaptation in their adaptation priorities and actions. And that's also identifying these actions in NAPs is also an important opportunity to consider trade-offs with other strategies. And I mentioned that earlier, that synergies also really, building synergies is also really an opportunity to try and not undermine progress in another area. Monitoring and evaluation is probably one of the areas or entry points that's least developed yet among building into synergies. But we do see efforts in trying to cross-reference monitoring frameworks understanding how different indicators under one convention can possibly be used under another to support reporting efforts, but also trying to align them under the different strategies. And then before I close, I just wanted to share, these are really just some of the resources that the NAP Global Network, International Institute for Sustainable Development, has worked on synergies between the different, specifically between biodiversity and climate, between the NDCs, NAPs, and NBSAPs, and then also in some of our earlier guidance notes, we've really tried to emphasize also the synergies between the SINDAC framework for disaster risk reduction, as well as the sustainable development goals. There's a ton more guidance and resources actually out there on this topic. But I also wanted to mention the Climate Nature Coordination Platform that is a collaborative effort to support countries in aligning their climate and biodiversity actions. And the platform stems from the COP28 joint statement on climate, nature, and people, and really is just ramping up its effort to help countries strengthen synergies between climate action and biodiversity conservation. So lots is happening on this topic. But with that, I will close now. Thank you so much, and I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Annika. So if anybody has any question for Annika at this point, we can take 2 questions for now, and then we'll take the rest of the questions after during the question and answer session. So any questions for Annika? Anybody?
I see a question in the chat, but I'm also happy to answer it in the chat if more questions come through.
Okay.
If we want to move forward with the program. So yeah, I'm happy to just type my answer out in the chat if that's easiest.
Okay, so thank you very much, Annika. Thank you for all this insightful and very clear presentation. So as mentioned before, the presentations for today's webinar will be uploaded on the UNFCCC event page, and the link has been shared in the chat. So just watch for this space just right after the webinar, and you'll be having all the presentations which will be uploaded. So now moving forward, so an important question that often comes to mind, which sounds abstract to most, is how to actually build the synergies. So we're now pleased to hear from Hunter Hales from the government of Belize, who will share country-level experiences from Belize itself in terms of integrating biodiversity and land considerations in NAPs, cross-sectoral coordination and governance, and steps towards what Belize is doing in terms of investment planning and framework for synergies. So Hunter, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Stefania. Good morning, everyone. My name is Hunter Hales. I'm here on behalf of the government of Belize, specifically the Climate Finance Unit within the Ministry of Economic Transformation. So Belize is actually an interesting case because we do have a lot of bodies separate from the main, climate change ministry that have a lot to do with climate change, climate adaptation, NAP work. So the synergies for us almost sort of come naturally, but there's still a lot of work and intentionality behind what we do in order to make sure that it's working and that we are building complementarity instead of duplication in a lot of the things that we do. So just a little bit about our office. The Climate Finance Unit is mandated by the Prime Minister and its cabinet to access climate finance, to increase Belize's access to climate finance. We hold the portfolios for the Adaptation Fund, for the Green Climate Fund, also for the NAP Global Network, the IDB Climate Change Platform, Euroclima, IDB Clima. So most of these climate funds, I would say the focal points are housed within our unit within the Ministry of Economic Transformation. Now that's slightly different because we also have the Ministry of Sustainable Development and Climate Change, who has the responsibility for UNFCCC reporting, more of the policy side of climate change and making sure that our NDCs and our NAPs and all of those documents are being adhered to. They also have the mandate to draft and validate these documents. So two units that work very closely together, but we have separate responsibilities. A little bit about our NAP experience so far. So Belize started a little different than most. We started with sectoral national adaptation plans. So the first one we started with was for the fisheries and coastal zone sector. The blue economy in this sector as a whole is incredibly important for our country as a small island developing state and as a country where tourism is one of our main sources of revenue. It's incredibly important that we protect this resource, and all of the co-benefits that come from it as well are incredibly important to the coastal communities. The majority of Belize's population lives along the coast, so anything that threatens their livelihoods, that threatens the ecosystems on the coast and in our marine spaces is a threat not only to the ecosystems, but also to the economy as well and the livelihoods of those who depend on that resource. So that's why we started with the fisheries and coastal zone sector. And that's something that we also had assistance from the NAP Global Network with for some vulnerability and livelihood assessments. Then we moved on to the water sector, and that's something that Annika mentioned, is that some of these sectors are sort of easy to have synergies because water is sort of all-encompassing, right? There's health as a part of that, there's climate change as a part of that, there's local government as a part of that, but water wanted, its own sort of emphasis, because usually it's just sort of an add-on. But here in Belize, where a lot of our underground water resources are transboundary, it was incredibly important that we had water have its own, I guess, emphasis, right? And so then we said, okay, so with the remainder of the funding that we could access from the GCF for NAPs, we decided to do one overarching multi-sectoral NAP. So apart from fisheries and coastal zone and apart from water, we have a multi-sectoral NAP currently under implementation that's going to be covering land use, human settlement and infrastructure, tourism, human health, agriculture, and forestry. So that's those are key sectors for the government that you will also find in all of our economic strategies, our medium-term development strategy. These are sectors that we've always sort of highlighted, but we also have in here land use and forestry, right? So we're trying to include biodiversity targets are sort of trickled within these as well. But here in Belize, it's important that because we have so much biodiversity, because we have such a reliance on our ecosystems that they are accounted for. So that's just sort of a little bit of a background on what we've been doing with the NAP so far. Now, how we sort of make all of this work, cross-sectoral coordination, governance, like I mentioned earlier, we do have different ministries that have this mandate when it comes to climate change. We have the CFU that's mandated to access the finance. We have the National Climate Change Office in another ministry that's mandated to serve as the UNFCCC focal point. And then each sector also has their own targets that they are aligned with. They have their own sectoral strategies, they have their own implementation plans, but all of this comes into alignment with some key documents. The first would be the medium-term development strategy. This is the overall strategy of the government, whatever administration is in power. It's a 5-year strategy, and it's sort of put together however the administration sees fit. Now, I will note that we recently had elections in March, so we are currently, well, it's the same administration previously that won again, but they have yet to update their MTDS. So the MTDS targets that I'll be talking about are from the previous administration, the previous 5 years. But they include 6 strategic objectives, and some of these strategic objectives have elements of the NAP. They also have, in each strategic objective, it outlines what SDG goals, what SDG targets or NDC targets are aligned to that. And they also have one strategic objective, protection of the environment, that is solely focused on this. So for us, for the climate adaptation, I guess technocrats, it was incredibly important for us to see not only an addition, but a whole strategic objective included in the MTDS towards climate change and adaptation. This shows the political will from the government to make investments and to prioritize projects in these spaces. So it's pretty easy to see some alignment there with the overall strategy of the government. We also have the NDC. So our NDC, like Annika mentioned as well, is currently, I think we're finished with the consultative process of getting this new draft completed, but it has yet to be endorsed by cabinet. So that's the part that we're at right now. But it comes at a perfect time because our multi-sectoral NAP is also being drafted at the same time that the new NDC was going through this consultation. So the project manager, all of the sector leads that were involved in this multi-sectoral NAP were also at all of the workshops for the updating of the new NDC. So some of those targets from the completed fisheries and water NAP and from the multi-sectoral NAP are being included as well in this new NDC. So that also helped a lot with not duplicating efforts, and also to sort of get this new, I guess these new targets, right? So our previous NDC, there were some things that were a little bit out of reach when it came to setting actionable and targets that we can meet. So that's where this NDC really is making a concerted effort to be a little bit more realistic. And that's where also the NAP process came into consideration there. And then also the climate finance strategy. So that's a strategy that is sort of the mandating strategy for our unit, for the climate finance unit, but it's also being updated this year. We're going to be starting the update this year. So again, it aligns perfectly with the multi-sectoral NAP and all of these sector leads that are going to be involved in the climate finance strategy as well. So I also just want to add that when we say coordination, Belize is a very, very small country. I know this is not the case in other places, but for us, it's not too difficult to get the leads of all these sectors in the same room. I think really the only issue is scheduling. But for the most part, it's, once the chief executive officers of these ministries are on board, then we can have the technical people in the room. So we usually have coordination meetings, at least bi-weekly, if not once monthly, with our key focal points. So for us, Climate Finance Unit, we would try to meet with the National Climate Change Office. We would meet with the project managers who are working on, for example, the multi-sectoral NAP, any other large climate projects. For example, we have one ongoing right now with the GCF that is looking at building resilience of our sugar industry. So large investments like this, we do aim to have at least monthly coordination meetings with them to make sure we know what's going on, we know what's being implemented, and also for us, because we are also responsible to help draft new concept notes, we want to make sure that we're not duplicating things that are already being done. That also we might not be aware of if another sector is leading it, right? So that's why it's important to have these monthly coordination meetings with them. We also have each sector lead involved in steering committees. So for the multi-sectoral NAP, each of those key sectors have involvement in the steering committee. So it's pretty simple to keep track. It's pretty easy to keep track as well. They are the voice of their sector, the voice of their ministry, and they can bring things to the limelight as well. And then, yeah, like I already mentioned, the NDC 3.0 is being drafted simultaneously as the multi-sectoral NAP. So all those lessons learned, all those targets that are in those NAPs were also being translated into the NDC. So when it comes to investment planning and more of these frameworks for synergies, our NDCs in the past have had an implementation plan, which takes into account the targets. I think it's divided from adaptation, mitigation, and cross-cutting. And it also gives you an overall investment, I guess, price, right? So what's the price for all of our adaptation actions and mitigation actions or cross-cutting actions? So that's pretty helpful. Like I said, the NDC 3.0, that's going to be the second part that has to be drafted right now. We finished the main NDC, but the implementation plan is yet to follow. But that will also now take into account the multi-sectoral NAP findings as well. the climate finance strategy as well, that's going to be under review and updated. I think when the first climate finance strategy was published in 2021, we had not yet finished any of our NAPs. So now that we do have NAPs completed, and we will have the multi-sectoral NAP completed by that time, that's going to have a huge input on the climate finance strategy as well. The medium-term development strategy, like I mentioned, now that we have a new administration, they're going to be working on an MTDS 2.0, which will also include these NAP and NDC targets in that sectoral, in that strategic objective that talks about protection of the environment. We also have a body, the Belize National Climate Change Committee. So that has always been existent, but it really hasn't been operationalized to the extent that it can be. So that will be sort of reinvented and rejuvenated with membership from key ministries. And the mandate of that is to really discuss and come to an agreement on different projects, different initiatives with regard to climate change or climate adaptation, mitigation projects, anything like that. So that's going to be a body that we depend on very much to not have duplication and to increase synergies again in the work that we do. So that's really it. That's just a little bit about what Belize is doing and what we have been doing so far. Workshops like these, and the NAP Global Network did have a workshop last year in Belize specifically about NAP and NDC alignment. So things like that are really helpful for us as SIDS countries, where this is, you know, it's basically something that we always have to keep in the back of our minds. And to continue to create these cross-sectoral events and participation on committees is incredibly important for us, not only globally, but also nationally. So we do intend to continue this dialogue in country as well. And that's it from my side.
Thank you very much, Hunter, for these very in-depth and insights from Belize. And again, if you have any questions for Hunter, don't hesitate to put them down in the chat for now, and we'll take them during our question and answer session. So without further ado, let's now move to our panel discussion on From Synergy to Investment. I would like to invite Silvia Mancini from the Adaptation Fund to begin with her presentation, which will be followed by Ludwig Liagre from Rio Unpack. So Silvia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stefania. Thank you all, and good morning, good afternoon. This is Silvia Mancini, and I am the country and partnership lead, unit lead here at the fund. So I'm going to share a very brief presentation of the work of the Adaptation Fund. I hope you can now see the presentation. So let me. I hope you can see it.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I'm just having a little bit of an issue with sorry. Some technical issue. Okay, so here we are. So in terms of the Adaptation Fund, just a quick recap. We have been in action since 2007. We have been established in 2001 under the Kyoto Protocol. And since the reason why we have been established is to finance concrete adaptation projects in developing countries. And since 2019, we served the Paris Agreement, and we are currently under the full transition to the Paris Agreement. In terms of another aspect of the fund, sorry, it keeps going too fast. The pursue, one of the characteristics, I will have to probably, there is a little bit of a problem with the presentation. Okay. And okay, I don't know why it's doing this. If you don't mind, I'll stop sharing for the moment and then reconnect in a different way because it seems to be going okay. So I hope You
yes,
can see.
it's fine now. Yes.
It's fine now. You can see it. I'm so
Yes.
sorry. And in terms of where we are with, we have been established as a financing mechanism under the NCQG text, and we are one of the financing mechanisms that needs to triple the outflow, the annual outflow from the Adaptation Fund and other UNFCCC climate funds by 2030, based on the 2022 levels. Now, where we are, and I'm going to show some very important impact area of the fund that is really based on why it is very relevant for us to talk about resilience and to talk about project and programs results conservation in the restoration and sustainable management of ecosystem services. We have over 20% of the fund portfolio is fully committed to increase ecosystem resilience in response to climate change. The fund also supports innovative approaches using nature-based solutions that will enhance knowledge and capacity building of the stakeholders throughout our project and programs. And in terms of the impact, you saw the first impact. The second impact is also totally, so not only the number of beneficiaries and number of early warning systems that have been achieved through the program and projects of the fund, but also total policies that mainstream climate consideration at different level of the governance. In addition to that, we also have increased ecosystem resilience through natural habitats, through enhancing area protected and restored, and also to the length of the coastline protection. Now, where we are a completely driven, country-driven fund, so we do not choose from a top-down approach a sectorial distribution. A sectorial, that we don't choose the sector of for the programs from the projects, but these are must be aligned to the NAPS and the NDC. And this is the sectorial distributions that you see. So we cover multi-sector, and one of the aspects of the Adaptation Fund is very much linked also not only to the national implementing entities that work with us, but also through the regional implementing entities. So the regional transboundary characteristic of the adaptation is clearly also in the sector of actions. Now, this is what I wanted to show, and in terms of where we are at the last board meeting, which was in April, the board approved 137 million in new projects, including approval of 16 full concrete adaptation projects on the ground, which raises the funds totally to nearly about 1.4 billion committed to about 200 projects. And this is also, the board also endorsed 15 concept and pre-concept and committed over 1.2 million in project formulation grants to help develop them further. Now, another element of the fund is that we, at the last board meeting, we also accredited the sixth entity, so making 60 accredited implementing entities, which 46% are in LDC and SEEDS, and 36% in Latin America and the Caribbean, and 34% in Africa, and 20% in Asia, and 2% in Eastern Europe. Now, in terms of the value, the building synergies, lay down the foundation for integrated investment frameworks that attract new funders, we see that the Adaptation Fund has value added and a comparative advantage, in particular with a few important aspects with regard to these conversations. First, there is a real focus on direct access and locally led adaptation. And we have streamlined and simplified accreditation access procedures. So not only from the accreditation, but also from the project and program. And I just want to say that the fund has implemented a 3 weeks review for any project proposal that is submitted to the fund. Robust safeguards and policies, also grant funding for smaller scale project and effective adaptation action. So these are really some of the characteristics that we believe are extremely important when we, in laying down the foundation for the integrated investment frameworks. Also, of course, there is, as was mentioned before during the webinar, support for capacity building and climate finance readiness. We have a very important readiness program and currently are engaged in an enhanced readiness strategy that is going to be presented at the next board meeting. Focus on learning and sharing. The fund has been very active in becoming really a champion of the learning and sharing, not only through the various tools that you can imagine in terms of e-learning courses and other really knowledge management products, but really being very practical in financing also the community of practices at the level of through the readiness program with the Green Climate Fund. So there is a community of practice which is called the CPDAE of entities that have been accredited to both funds, and this really creates a very important level of peer learning exchange, which is absolutely fundamental for the senior that we are mentioning. Scalability of investment, as I will go back to this point, and then support for NAPS and NDC's implementation. Now, all of this really to catalyze impact, so beyond the adaptation funded intervention, to really make sure that there is always a scale up and really catalyzing the impact of all the actions that we're trying to do. In terms of the adaptation support for LDC and seeds, this is absolutely the core. 50% of the adaptation fund portfolio is in LDCs and seeds. LDCs is about 31%, seeds is about 18%. And of course, the country, 37% of the portfolio is in Africa because it's the continent in most needs, but then it's 29% in Asia and Pacific and 26% in the Latin America and the Caribbean. As I said, we have a very important complementarity and coherence with the other climate funds. So not only with the GCF, with which we have an important accreditation and reaccreditation fast track processes, but also scale up framework. But really, we are part of the regular conversations between CIF, GEF, the GCF and the Adaptation Fund for really creating alignment and synergies that are extremely important when we are talking about going from NAPS and NDCs to effective investment planning. In terms of the scalability of the Adaptation Fund projects, so there is really a lot of, in terms of knowledge sharing, publications, but really very much practical experience on the ground that has helped a number of funders to really create investment frameworks that are effective. So let me stop here. Thank you, and apologies from the beginning of the technical issue with the presentation.
No worries. Thank you very much, Sylvia. So now I would like to give the floor to Ludwig.
Thank you very much, dear Stefania, and thanks, Sylvia, for the great presentation. If you allow me, I'd like now actually to build on the idea that synergy-oriented NAPs are foundations for investment frameworks. And I'd like to share in particular two main ideas, two main points on this topic. The first one on how integrated NAPs, synergy-oriented NAPs, can be conducive to unlock domestic financing. Indeed, integrated NAPs can provide a policy, but also a planning backbone that can guide national funding mechanisms. You may have heard of conservation trust funds, national climate funds, but also national forest funds, national development banks, even commercial banks at national level. And actually, when NAPs reflect goals across the 3 Rio Conventions, they can really send a powerful signal to domestic financiers. The key message is here is where investments for cross-cutting and long-term national resilience are needed. So it really gives a signal where the domestic funding mechanisms and domestic financing institutions should invest for long-term national and local resilience. For example, conservation trust funds, national biodiversity funds, they can support and finance nature-based solutions that support adaptation, but also land degradation neutrality, ecosystem health. So they can be a really great tool for synergies, like many of the other mechanisms I've mentioned. You may know the CAFE network, the consortium of African funds for the environment in Africa, but also the REDLAC network in Latin America. There is also a similar network of conservation trust funds in the Asia Pacific. All these funds that are part of those networks really are great entry points to build synergies. And of course, beyond these funds, you have other tools like the national climate funds I mentioned, or others more sectoral national forest funds, but also for the agricultural sector. Sometimes you have national agricultural fund or domestic agricultural development banks, for example, that can be great entry points. And NAPs surely can really guide those institutions to invest for synergies. Secondly, the point I'd like to make is really on the importance of integrated NAPs to enable private sector finance and impact investment. Because a well-designed NAP with synergies included can really help identify investment-ready actions that qualify for possibly public-private partnerships, but also blended finance, and that maximize the level of environmental and financial returns that can be delivered, especially when, for example, sustainable value chains are included in those NAPs. So NAP can really help to demonstrate the alignment with multiple international commitments and the SDGs. And in this, private sector investors can more easily meet their ESG targets when then they invest in adaptations, the environmental, social, and governance standards, which are so important for many investors now, and including impact investors. So integrated NAPs can really help articulate also project pipelines and project pipelines that contribute to not only then adaptation, but also possibly mitigation, biodiversity, land, and other SDGs. So clearly, this kind of NAPs, the synergy-oriented NAPs, really offer more than plans. They offer some forms of investment platforms almost that help to mobilize investors, project developers, policymakers, experts, and that help to connect them. So we could see also synergy-oriented NAPs as a way to build matchmaking and to be a convening platform between developers, project developers, but also investors and financing institutions. So really, I'd like with this idea that we could continue exchanging on the importance of NAPs for investments and the importance of NAPs and synergy-oriented NAPs to build those investment frameworks that are conducive for synergies. With that, thank you very much, and I'm giving the floor back to Stefania.
Thank you very much, Ludwig. So I think now you have an interactive session.
Yes, so, we'd love to hear from you, actually, dear participants, maybe to react on some of the last presentations, including from Sylvia, but also Annika, Hunter, and a few words that I've just shared. So the floor is yours if you'd like to ask any question or share some comments. You can just raise your hand and we'll give you the floor.
I see we have Eric. So Eric?
Thank you so much for the wonderful, informative, instructive presentations that have been made. I'm speaking from Namibia, and I just wished to quickly mention that for our coordination over here, we have a committee for all the 3 Rio Conventions. And what that does is that it enhances coordination, information sharing, troubleshooting, joint planning, building synergies, and working together to just make sure that we have greater impact, as it were. And also to indicate that the representation in that particular committee has all the different ministries, Ministry of Finance, mentioned them, investment funds, development banks, commercial banks, private sector, and the rest of them, as well as ministries for government and UN agencies. So I just wish to appreciate the presentations that have been made, and it would be nice to go through them once again once they're deposited. You said they'll be on the website for UNFCCC, I think. That would be great, and we are hoping there can be more information so that the efforts that we are trying to make at national level, we can benefit from what is happening in other countries, and of course from you, the leaders at those high levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric, for sharing Namibia's experience. So I see that we also have Céline.
Yes, thank you. I'm talking on behalf of the Urban Poor constituency and from the role of a practitioner. Is it possible, and I see a lot of scope for the national adaptation plans and the city adaptation plans to actually include the communities living in vulnerable locations and actually bringing their specific needs to the table instead of just conglomerating them as vulnerable communities? Is it possible to therefore bring them together according to their livelihoods or their geography in a way that the National Adaptation Plan then recognizes their specific needs? For example, waste pickers communities, mangrove communities. You have, like, there's a huge community in Sierra Leone, in Freetown, that's working together with the. So is it possible to bring these organized voices to the table so that the National Adaptation Plan becomes more specific and more nuanced in its in how it responds to local needs?
Okay, so maybe Ludwig, you would like to respond on this one?
Sorry, dear colleagues, I was actually looking for some links to share with you. So if anyone would like to react instead, or Stefania, maybe you want to summarize the point that was made, and I'm happy to answer.
So maybe Céline, you would like to share your contact details via chats, and then now we'll get back to you on this one and share concrete examples or ways on how you can engage.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, but
and
I request your team to think of this. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. It is noted. So I see that we also have Chris.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the great presentation and elaborate explanation of the NAP program and ecosystem adaptation program. Yeah, I'm just trying to find out 2 things. One, how can the integration of nature-based solution and ecosystem restoration within National Adaptation Plan, that's NAP, enhance climate resilience while delivering co-benefit for biodiversity, livelihood, especially for stewardess, nature holders, especially in the area of the area of conservation, and also the area of people, business people and natural stewards are always in conflict because people trying to come and degrade their natural places for maybe logging and other things, mining and other things. They are always in conflict. The best way to to solve the issues in putting a very robust society, the whole of society into mainstreaming the NAP project to make sure they are all inclusive.
Okay, so
so that they'll be understanding, and also the nature of yeah. And then another thing I want to find out is I was trying to know, is there a waiver for the UNCCD accreditation for my young organization also? Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, Chris. So you've been breaking up, so I hope we've been able to capture all your questions. So maybe Annika would like to come on this one about co-benefits and area for conservation.
Thanks, Marie. Yeah, I think I put it in the chat that I think there's a lot to be learned from the biodiversity processes, especially the NBSAPs and on engagement with Indigenous peoples and local communities. There's a ton of resources out there as well, because just traditionally the CBD convention has just been, has a separate program on engaging with Indigenous people. I think that's one of the areas where the climate processes and planning processes can learn from. But otherwise, I think in terms of the NAP process itself, given that it's the guiding principles of the NAP process involve participatory multi-stakeholder processes, which implies strong engagement by local communities, Indigenous peoples. And I think that's really where I see some of the hopefully answer for Chris. But again, I shared a couple links in the chat as well that I hope can provide a bit more background on that topic.
Okay, I'll look at it. And how about the second question? I was trying to find out how can I get a waiver for accreditation for UNCCD BALAM 2030, because I really couldn't attend the one for the Azerbaijan because of limited, and I have my NGO now, so I don't know how you can help me on that as well.
Okay,
that
so
would be
maybe,
a question for someone else.
Yeah, yeah. I think Alejandro, you might want to come on this one.
Thanks, Stefania, for the accreditation. I guess you have to go to our process through our webpage. So I can find the link, but if you have a registered organization, then you can apply for registration. It does take some time, so there are not necessarily guarantees that it could be ready by COP30, but it has to go through the accreditation process. Let me look for the link and I can put it on the chat.
Thank you, Alejandro. I see that Eric, is it? Do you have a new question?
Not at all. It should be a legacy hand. Apologies. Let me bring it down.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Does anybody else have any new question that you would like to ask for our speakers, or would you like to have a clarification on the discussion that's been taking place? Please don't hesitate. Okay, so I also think that most questions in the chat have been answered. In case I'm missing some. Okay, let me see. Okay, I think we're good. So if we don't have any more questions, let's move forward. So I would now like to invite Nancy Moreno from the UNCCD Global Mechanism to share some of her concluding thoughts for our webinar today. So Nancy?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Marie. So, hi, everybody. Nancy Moreno, as you mentioned, from the Global Mechanism of the UNCCD. Thank you for having me today. I'm a project management officer that works on project preparation and partnerships I'm coordinator of the work on related to synergies. So it has been a pleasure to share the floor with all the speakers and the participants, and I have been listening all the presentations, and has been like a very close related work that we have been doing with the global mechanism. And actually I have heard some of the partners and colleagues. Eric, I know you, and we have been working together in some of the projects. So it's very nice that people has been shown very a lot of interest in this topic as well. So thank you. So as we draw this insightful and timely webinar to a close, as very timely as several of the speakers mentioned, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all of our speakers, panelists, organizers, and participants who join us from around the world. Today's discussion has reinforced the building synergies into national adaptation plans is not only smart policy, but is a strategic imperative. We have seen that integrating climate, biodiversity, and land-related objectives into NAPs makes both environmental and economic sense. It unlocks co-benefits, that several of our speakers had mentioned, avoids duplication of efforts as well, and critically opens new pathways to access and blend climate finance across the Rio Conventions. Our keynote certainly reminded us that synergy is more than alignment. It's not that we are overlapping our objectives and targets, but it's also amplification of our efforts or our ambitions. When we bring together the goals of the 3 conventions, we multiply the impact of each dollar that we invest and ensure that adaptation actions enhance ecosystem resilience, livelihoods, and food and water security, especially in the world's most vulnerable regions. Let me highlight some of the few messages from today that at the same time reflect the work that we at the Global Mechanism of the UNCCD contribute to adaptation planning. First, land is central to adaptation. Land is where climate change hits harder and where solutions should take root. Sustainable land management and land degradation neutrality are not side issues. They are foundation for climate resilience. Healthy land buffers against drought, extreme weather, and displacement. It also sustains rural economies and food systems. Secondly, adaptation is a systems challenge. The UNCCD advances an integrated landscape-based approach that connects water security, agricultural transformation, ecosystem restoration, and social inclusion. These are not isolated pillars. They are interdependent strategies for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Third, building synergies is essential. No single convention or sector can tackle the scale and complexity of global crises. We heard a few examples today from countries like Belize, case studies to technical panels like the the Adaptation Fund and the NAP coalition or network, of how governments are aligning with the NAPs, with NDCs, with MBSAPs, with LDN targets, to other type of instruments or tools like drought plans, biodiversity strategies, or other like different type of instruments and tools. And with this approach, we are trying to boost efficiency, attracts more financing, and ensures long-lasting results. Resource mobilization should be proactive and strategic. And this is my... At the Global Mechanism of the UNCCD, we work hand in hand with countries to close the financing gap for land-based solutions through initiatives like the transformative projects and programs for LDN. And in this work, our support includes assessing financial needs, prioritizing investment opportunities, and design large-scale bankable adaptation projects in collaboration with partners like the Adaptation Fund, the GEF, UCF, and other international financial institutions. We offer technical guidance, capacity building, and targeted matchmaking to align project needs with appropriate funding sources, ensuring in this way that countries' resource mobilization strategies are grounded in sound financial and methodological principles. Today's focus on positioning NAPs as investment planning tools is fully aligned with our approach, as Ludwig mentioned in his last intervention. And one of the topics that came up frequently throughout the webinar was the participation of local communities. So adaptation must be inclusive. All adaptation measures and interventions should be designed along with local communities. It's not just about infrastructure and finance. It's about people. The perspectives of local communities, indigenous peoples, women, and younger generations must inform planning process. The UNCCD advocates for inclusive decision-making, fair distribution of benefits, and strong local engagement to ensure that adaptation efforts are not only effective, but also equitable. So what is next? Where do we go from here? We can leverage the tools and guidance shared today, from capacity building models to investment frameworks, to identify opportunities in your own national adaptation plans processes. Engage ministries of finance and planning early, using language they can understand, speaking the same language, like returns, risks, resilience. That's the way that you can engage these key actors into these processes. And stay engaged through upcoming workshops and knowledge platforms. Additionally, look forward to the release of new practical tools, operational resources, best practices, and lessons learned that we are currently developing. So last but not least, I want to leave you with a simple message, that is, the synergies are not an option. They are key to unlocking transformative land-based solutions to climate resilience and biodiversity conservation. We need to break down the silos that separate institutions, sectors, and instead of that, we need to build bridges across ministries, conventions, and across communities as well. So thank you again for being here to go through the whole webinar, and I hope that this will help you to progress, to advance in this agenda of synergies.
Thank you very much, Nancy. So I would like to give the floor back to Ludwig.
Thank you, Stefania, and thank you, Nancy, for this very inspiring words. And I would echo that synergies are not an option, actually, given all the resources, but also time constraint, and we have to meet the goals of the Rio Conventions and other MEAs, and we don't have much time for this. I wanted, before we close, to give you a few ideas on the next steps of the Joint Capacity Building Program, because you can expect additional formats like this one today. We hope you enjoyed it. We're going to have more webinars this year, including on how to build synergies in NBSAPs, but also how to build synergies in LDN targets. And beyond, the question of joint monitoring and reporting will be very important for the program. We are also going to offer self-paced learning opportunities through e-learning formats and in-person training opportunities as well. If you are attending, for example, the next subsidiary bodies meetings in Bonn in June this year, we're going to have a dedicated session on synergies. And so before we close, I wanted actually to do a quick quiz with you. And I see we don't have much time, so I'm going to go through the questions, and I hope you will see that you learned a lot today. Let me share my screen with you, and I'm going through the questions. I hope you can see the slides. Oh, just have a technical issue to project, but that should be fine. Do you see it?
Yes, it works now.
Ah, super. So the first question is, a synergistic approach in NAPs can help A, streamline reporting obligations, B, enhance resource efficiency, C, achieve multiple environmental goals, and D, all of the above. So don't hesitate to share your answers in the chat, or maybe you just count the points for yourself, and that way you can check if you got the response right. So the response here is actually all of the above. Of course, NAPs can bring multiple benefits. Second questions, a country's NAP that includes mangrove restoration to enhance coastal protection, improve fisheries, and store carbon. Which Rio Conventions do you think this action support? Is it A, UNFCCC, B, CBD, or C, UNCCD? Actually, the first answers maybe are relatively easy, and of course, it supports the three. So it's an example of a practical action that delivers benefits for the three Rio Conventions. Third question, which of the following NAP activities could represent a synergy between LDN and CBD goals? A, expanding monoculture plantations for carbon credits. B, restoring degraded forest ecosystems using native species. C, building seawalls in coastal cities. And D, draining wetlands for agriculture. And here the response is B. I hope you agree with me. The others are a more siloed approach. The fourth question, synergies in NAPs are best achieved when planning is led exclusively by climate change units. And here you can see that, of course, climate change units, they can do a lot of work, but to really build synergies, you need to have cooperation with other units in charge of conservation of biodiversity, but also LDN. Unless you're in the case of Namibia, like Eric mentioned, when you have under the same team or the same roof, the three conventions covered, then it's much easier. On the fifth question, which of the following best explains why integrated NAPs are attractive to private sector investors? Do you think it's because they guarantee rapid profits, because they reduce regulatory oversight, because they demonstrate reduced risk through co-benefits and resilience, or because they ensure carbon revenues? And the correct answer is C. Clearly, there's a big advantage in risk mitigation, but also multiple benefits and resilience in the eyes of private sector investors. The sixth question, what are financial or investment-related benefits of building synergies across Rio Conventions in NAPs? Is it to access the LDN fund, to access multiple funding streams, improved cost effectiveness and return on investment through integrated programming, selling biodiversity credits? And the response is C, improve cost effectiveness, but also increased return on investment through integrated programming that can also yield results and returns from several value chains, and the valorization of ecosystem services that are relevant for adaptation. On the seventh question, this one is a bit tricky because of the acronyms. Which ones of these global funds can support synergistic projects across Rio Conventions? And the response is all of these four acronyms, actually. And the first one, the GEF, is for the Global Environmental Facility. We've got the Green Climate Fund. We've got also the Adaptation Fund that Sylvia represented today, and the Climate Investment Funds. Now, of course, this list is non-exhaustive. You have other global funds or impact funds who can also support the synergies. What role can national development banks play in financing synergistic NAP actions? Actually, one of the key roles the development banks, especially at national level, can play is to act as intermediaries for international climate funds, including, for example, under the Green Climate Fund, they can act, if they are accredited, they can act as accredited entity for direct access. And the ninth question, also an acronym question, what is the name of the coordination body for the three Rio Conventions executive secretaries? And this one is actually the Joint Liaison Group, the GLG. So I hope this quiz was helpful also to bring back some ideas from the discussion. And with that, I'd like really to thank all of you, and I'm giving the floor back to Stefania. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ludwig. So we come to the end of our webinar for today. So huge thank you to our speakers for sharing their invaluable insights and experiences. And today's discussion has underscored how we can leverage the Rio synergies and effectively build synergies in national adaptation plans to catalyze joint action and investment. So a heartfelt thank you to you, our participants, for your presence and active engagement. So we look forward to welcoming you to our next webinar, which, as Ludwig mentioned, will focus on Rio synergies and MBSAPs. So more details will be shared via our social media channels, newsletters, and the event page on the UNFCCC website. So be sure to stay connected. And last but not the least, I'd also like to take this opportunity to express our appreciation to our colleagues from the three convention secretariat, that is the UNFCCC, CBD, and UNCCD, for their continued support and collaboration in making this joint capacity building program a success. So thank you all once again. So have a wonderful evening or a great day or wherever you are. So goodbye, everybody, and see you next time for our webinar.